The recall notice arrived at 3:40 hours, Colony Standard Time, and Davin Sayer read it 3 times before he understood what it meant. He was sitting at his workbench in the back room of the engineering bay, a cup of something warm and forgotten at his elbow, the guts of a coolant regulator spread across the table in front of him. The notice had come through his terminal, not broadcast, not shouted over the compound interlocutors, but slipped quietly into his personal queue the way bad news always arrived when someone didn't want to make a scene. Subject line: Urgent, Unit VEKKA 9 designated for immediate recall and decommission. He had to read the middle word twice. Decommission. The word sat in his chest like a stone swallowed whole. He pushed back from the bench and looked across the bay to where she was working. She was crouched beside the main power coupling housing, a panel removed, both arms buried to the elbow in a snarl of conduit that had been giving the whole forward section fits for 3 weeks. Her skin was the color of old birch bark, that pale gray-green the Vekari went when they were concentrating, blood drawn inward, all systems focused on the task, and her tusks, short for her kind, caught the worklight and threw back 2 small crescents of gold. She was humming. That was the thing that got him always. Even now she hummed while she worked, not a melody he recognized. Something older, a scale that shouldn't have worked by any harmonic logic he could calculate, and yet it worked, and when she hummed it the whole bay felt quieter than it was. "Vecco," he said. She didn't look up. Coupling seized. "Give me 4 minutes." "Vecco." Something in his voice pulled her head around. Her eyes deep amber, pupils vertical, the irises doing that slow contraction they did when she shifted from task mode to attention mode, settled on him, and on the terminal screen behind him, and she went very still. "What is it?" she said. He turned the screen toward her. She read it the same way he had, twice. Then she pulled her arms from the housing, wiped her hands on the front of her work vest, and stood up in that unhurried way she had of standing, like a cliff face deciding to become vertical. She was a head taller than him. Most of her kind were. He had stopped noticing it somewhere around the 4th month of working together, which was a strange thing, looking back, because before her, he had never worked alongside a Vekari at all. "When?" she said. "The transport arrives in 6 days. She looked at the terminal a moment longer, then she looked at him. Her expression was the one he'd come to think of as her neutral but not neutral face. The one where she had made some internal calculation he couldn't read and was waiting to see what he would do with information she hadn't yet shared. "It's the debt," he said. "I still owe the cooperative for your contract, you know that." "I know. I'm working on it. I've been working on it." "Davin." She said his name the way she always did, with the Vekari inflection on the second syllable, though long and soft, like she was noting something worth noting. "Davin, you have 6 days." He had, in fact, 4,012 credits to his name, against a contract debt of 140,000. He had been working on it for 11 months. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said back, and turned around and put her arms back into the coupling housing. He sat there and watched her work and thought about the word decommission, and eventually he picked up his forgotten cup and drank whatever cold thing was in it, and went back to the coolant regulator because the alternative was sitting still, and he had never been good at sitting still. He had not asked for her. That was the first thing anyone said when the story came up, which it did, sometimes, in the crew commissary, when the night shift was slow and people wanted something to talk about that wasn't the 14 months of contract labor still ahead of them. He had not asked for her. He had been trying to unfold a corrupted data packet that Navar, his nominal rival, which was a strange thing to have on a rock 40 light minutes from the nearest inhabited station, but Navar managed it with genuine commitment, had embedded in his research files. And while he was fighting the packet's encryption, his interface had somehow tapped the cooperative's labor exchange. And 3 hours later, a Vekari labor unit had arrived at his module airlock in a sealed transit crate. He remembered opening the crate. He remembered the moment she unfolded herself from it, that particular Vekari movement, all angles resolving into height, the joints articulating in sequence like a structure being erected, and looked at him with those amber eyes, and said, in perfectly calibrated standard with the faintest trace of Stone Valley inflection, "I am Veka 9, designated engineer's assistant. I am assigned to your unit. I understand there has been an error." He had said, "Yes." She had said, "Do you want me to go?" He had said, No, you can stay." She had looked at his workbench, which was chaos. She had looked at the coolant regulator he had been fighting with for 6 days. She had picked it up, turned it over twice in her big hands, done something with her thumb to the secondary valve that he still didn't entirely understand, and handed it back to him fixed. "Okay," she'd said, and that had been that. The debt was real. The cooperative's rates for Vekari labor units were structured around the assumption that the contracting party had done the contracting deliberately, and the invoicing reflected this. Davin had inherited a bill for 140,000 credits the same afternoon he'd inherited Veka, and he had been managing his way toward it ever since, picking up secondary contracts, filing for research grants, doing electrical work for 3 other modules in exchange for equipment credits he could convert. He had not made much progress. The cooperative did not care. They had a contract, they had a unit in the field, and they expected payment. What they had not expected, apparently, was for the unit to still be there 11 months later, or for the field engineer to have developed what the recall notice called, in its bureaucratic language, an irregular operational dependency. He had read that phrase 4 times. Irregular operational dependency. He thought about it while he walked the perimeter of the module compound in the low Kelthani gravity. The sky overhead a deep amber purple at this hour, 2 of the 3 moons up, and the third just clearing the eastern ridge. Irregular operational dependency. He supposed that was one way to say that without Veka, the coolant coupling would still be seized. The research array would have lost 3 data columns in the magnetic storm 2 months ago, and he himself would probably have made some fatal error with the atmospheric processors in month 7, when he'd been running a fever, and trying to work through it because no one else was going to do it. She had noticed the fever before he had. She had taken his temperature with her hand against his forehead, a Vekari medical assessment technique, the body heat reading done through the palm skin, and told him to sit down. And then she had managed the atmospheric processors while he slept, and she had not mentioned it afterward, and he had not mentioned it either, but he had thought about it, because no one had done anything like that for him in a very long time. He stopped walking and looked up at the 2 moons. 6 days. On the 2nd day, Navar came by. Navar was everything Davin was not, in the way that rivals in isolated places tended to become. Better funded, better connected, louder. He had 3 modules to Davin's 1, a full research staff of 4, and a cooperative contract that had been negotiated deliberately, at his leisure, from a comfortable chair in a cooperative office somewhere with gravity and atmosphere and a view. He had come to Keltha with intentions and resources. Davin had come with a research grant and 2 duffel bags, and the specific stubbornness of someone who had been told repeatedly that his work wasn't worth funding. Navar knocked on the airlock frame. He always knocked on the airlock frame, never the actual contact panel, which was a small affectation that Davin found inexplicably irritating, and said, "Heard about the recall." Davin did not look up from his terminal. News travels. It's a small compound. Navar leaned against the frame. He was wearing his good jacket, which meant he'd been up to the communications relay, which meant he'd been talking to someone off rock. You know the cooperative doesn't joke about this kind of thing. When they send the notice, the transport's already been dispatched. I know. If you want, I can put in a word. I have a contact in the regional office who... I don't need a word put in. Navar was quiet for a moment. He had the look he sometimes got, a look that was not quite sympathy and not quite contempt, but occupied the ambiguous territory between them. Davin, she's a labor unit. The cooperative designed her to do the work you've been using her for. If you can't pay the contract, they'll just place her somewhere else. I know what she is. Do you, though? It wasn't quite a question. Davin finally looked up. What is that supposed to mean? It means you've been here 11 months, and in 11 months I've never once seen you interact with her the way anyone else on this compound interacts with their contracted labor. You interact with her like she's. Navar stopped and seemed to reconsider the direction of the sentence. You interact with her like she's a colleague. She is a colleague. Navar looked at him with an expression that said many things, and then he looked at the recall notice still up on Davin's terminal, and he left without saying any of them. Vecca found him on the roof of the module housing that evening. He had a habit of going up there when the compound was quiet. There was a section of the external carapace, just behind the communications array, where you could sit with your back against the housing and look out over the ridge to the east, and when the light was right the shadows pooled in the rock formations in a way that reminded him of no place he had ever been but felt specific anyway. He had not told anyone about this spot. Vecca had found it anyway on the third week, because she found things. It was a quality she had, an orientation toward whatever was being hidden, not out of intrusion, but out of a Veccari sense that hidden things were generally the most important things. She had never asked him why he went there. She had sometimes climbed up with him and sat in companionable silence, close enough that he could hear her breathing, far enough that they each had their own rectangle of the view. She came up the access ladder and settled beside him with the careful precision she had for enclosed spaces, her limbs finding the geometry of the spot without effort. In her hands she had a small sealed container, which she set between them without comment. He looked at it. Cassie Tanny gave me it, Vecca said. Cassie Tanny was the compound medic, the one with the good collection of off-world food stocks that she distributed sometimes on occasions she deemed appropriate. She said to tell you the occasion is approximately correct. He opened the container. Inside were 2 small protein cakes, the kind that had actual cultured grain in them, which were extraordinarily expensive out here, and tasted almost exactly like something he had eaten as a child at a table he no longer had access to. He ate one. He handed her the other, which she took and held, and examined with the particular Veccari expression that meant she was deciding whether a thing was for consumption or for keeping. Then she ate it slowly, in 2 careful bites. You know what I've been thinking about, he said. Probably the debt, she said. Before that, he pulled his knees up and looked at the ridge. When you got here, when I opened that crate, I didn't know what I was doing. I still don't half the time. I got you by accident, and you've been covering for the gap between what I know how to do and what actually needs doing. And I keep thinking about how unfair that is. You deserve better than being somebody's accidental competence gap. She was quiet for a while. The wind off the ridge had the particular metallic quality it got this time of night, the atmospheric processor output mixing with the natural convection from the east face. Davin, she said eventually. Yeah. I have been placed in 4 contract positions before this one. 3 of them I was assigned deliberately by contractors who knew what they were purchasing. One of them I was assigned by an error. She paused. This is the second error. He waited. The first error, she said, put me with a research team in the Orcs system. They were very organized. Their requisition was precise. They had a clear operational need and they had assessed it correctly, and I filled it exactly. She set her hands on her knees. After 4 months they noted in my contract evaluation that I performed within expected parameters, which was accurate. And the errors, he said. The errors, she said, require improvisation. The gaps between what was planned and what is are different every day. You cannot fill those gaps with standard procedure. You have to think. You have to look at what is in front of you and decide, not retrieve. She was quiet again. I like the deciding, she said. He sat with that. Vecca, he said carefully. If I could fix the debt situation, if there was a way to pay the cooperative and keep you on this contract legitimately, would you want that? I'm not asking if you'd consent to it. I'm asking if you'd want it. She turned her head and looked at him with the amber eyes doing that slow contraction thing. The wind moved through the communications array above them and made a low single tone that held for a second and then dissolved. I would want it, she said. He nodded. He looked at the ridge. He thought about Navarre's contact in the cooperative regional office, and about his own research files, and about a particular piece of data he had been sitting on for 3 weeks because he had not been sure what to do with it, and about the number 4012 against the number 140,000. Okay, he said, give me 4 days. You have 5, she said. 4 is enough. The data he had been sitting on concerned the compound's geological survey readings, which were technically secondary data, not the primary object of his research contract, not what the cooperative or his grant committee was paying him to analyze, but the kind of thing that turned up when you left your sensors running at full spectrum on a rock that had been geologically active in the last 10,000 years. What the readings showed, in the particular language of deep spectrum mineral analysis, was a subsurface crystalline formation approximately 60 meters below the eastern ridge that had a very specific resonance signature. The kind of signature that, in the catalogs of rare materials used in long-range communication infrastructure, corresponded to a mineral called Threat-9, which the Interstellar Communications Authority needed in quantities that had exceeded supply for the last 8 years, and was currently valued at approximately 1,200 credits per extracted gram. He had not told anyone about this because it wasn't his to tell. The survey rights on subsurface mineral deposits on contracted research worlds were held by the cooperative, which had first exploitation rights, and the protocol was to file a discovery claim and receive a finder's percentage of extraction value, which was typically around 1%. 1% of a Threat-9 deposit large enough to produce a resonance reading at 60 meters was, even conservatively estimated, considerably more than 140,000 credits. He had been sitting on this because it would mean the end of his research contract. An active extraction operation made precise geological study impossible, and the cooperative would likely terminate his agreement and bring in extraction teams. And because he had not wanted to accelerate the end of anything. But the alternative now was worse. He filed the discovery claim on day 3. On day 4, the cooperative's regional office returned his communication. The agent assigned to his account was a small-faced person with the permanently tired expression of someone who processed hundreds of debt cases and had seen most of the ways they resolved, and she listened to him explain the filing, looked at his survey data for a long time, and then looked back at him. Mr. Sayer, she said, this is a significant claim. I know. We'll need to verify it before we can apply any finder's percentage. How long does verification take? Typically 6 to 8 standard weeks for a subsurface claim of this depth. He felt the number land. I need it faster than that. She studied him. The recall transport arrives in 3 days. Yes. She was quiet for a moment, doing something with her terminal that he couldn't see. I can flag this for expedited review. That still typically takes 2 to 4 weeks. She looked at him. But I can also flag the recall for administrative hold pending resolution of a financial instrument with an active discovery claim attached. That's standard procedure for contested debt cases. He sat forward in his chair. How long does an administrative hold last? It lasts until the claim is resolved. She almost smiled, one way or another. He thanked her. He closed the communication. He sat very still for a moment in the particular silence of someone who has just moved a very large piece and does not yet know if the board is going to cooperate. Then he went to find Veka. She was in the Eastern sample storage room, cataloging a set of core samples he had been ignoring for 2 months because the results hadn't fit his initial models, and he had been avoiding the implication of that. She did this sometimes, found the things he had been avoiding and quietly worked on them until they were unavoidable. He had mixed feelings about it, which he had decided was a reasonable response. He told her about the discovery claim and the administrative hold. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "You filed for your finder's percentage." "Yes." "You know that will end your research contract." "Yes." "The extraction operation will require me to operate under reassignment terms until the debt is cleared. I would technically be under cooperative jurisdiction for the duration." "I know, but the hold means you're not recalled, you're here." She was quiet for a moment. She had a core sample in her hands, a gray-black cylinder about 30 centimeters long, and she was turning it slowly without looking at it, the way she handled objects when she was thinking. "Davin," she said. "Yeah. This is a very human thing to do." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, "that the most logical resolution to this situation was to accept the recall and apply for a standard labor reassignment credit, which would have offset your debt by 18%. That was the cleanest path." She turned the core sample over once more. "But you found a path that keeps the situation from ending at significant cost to yourself by doing something irreversible that you were not required to do." "The deposit was real," he said. "I would have had to file eventually." "You would have had to file," she agreed. "Eventually," she looked at him. "You filed now." He didn't have a good answer to that. He looked at the core sample in her hands. "What does that one show?" "Your initial models were wrong in the second-level analysis," she said. "The eastern ridge has a secondary mineral layer that your models didn't account for. It changes the predicted boundaries of the Threat 9 deposit significantly." "Significantly how?" "Significantly larger." She set the sample down and looked at him with the amber eyes. "Significantly more than 140,000 credits." He absorbed this. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. The recall transport arrived on schedule and docked at the compound's service port in the early morning of the 5th day. It was a standard cooperative logistics vessel, gray and institutional, with the cooperative's angular sigil stenciled on its hull in the bureaucratic way of organizations that had never felt the need to make themselves attractive. 3 agents came down the boarding ramp in cooperative administrative attire and presented themselves at the compound's main airlock, and Davin met them there. He gave them the administrative hold documentation. The lead agent was a Borathi, a species he had not worked with before, wide and deliberate in movement, with the patient expression of someone accustomed to delays because they had seen every kind of delay there was. She read the documentation twice. She looked at him. She looked at the documentation again. "This is filed correctly," she said. "Yes." "The discovery claim is genuine." "Yes." "You understand that the administrative hold means the unit remains under cooperative jurisdiction until the claim is fully processed." "I understand." She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not quite the tired sympathy of the debt agent in the regional office, but was related to it. The look of someone who has seen this kind of case before, maybe not this exact configuration, but the essential shape of it. The human in the cold place who has done something irreversible and is standing in front of an institution with his paperwork and his jaw set, and his number 4012 against whatever number the institution has decided matters. "All right, Mr. Sayer," she said. She folded the documentation into her case. "The hold is active. We'll notify you when the claim review is complete." She turned and went back up the ramp, and the transport disengaged from the service port and moved out over the eastern ridge and was gone into the amber-purple sky. And he stood at the airlock and watched it go and let out a long, slow breath that he had been holding, it seemed, for approximately 5 days. Behind him, Vecca said, "They left." "They left," he said. He turned around. She was standing at the corridor junction, her arms at her sides, watching him with the amber eyes, and he thought, not for the first time, not recently for the first time, that she was one of the most particular people he had ever been in a room with, full of the specific gravity of someone who has decided what they think about things and does not waste the decision. "Cassie Tanny has more of those protein cakes," Vecca said. "She told me this morning." "Celebrating seems premature," he said. "It is not a celebration," she said. "It is an acknowledgement that something difficult has been navigated. They are different things." He nodded. "Okay." They walked through the module together toward the commissary, and overhead through the observation port the amber-purple sky was doing the particular thing it did in the post-dawn window, the light refracting off the eastern ridge's mineral face, so that for about 20 minutes every morning the whole compound interior turned the color of old copper, and Vecca walked through it, and her gray-green skin picked up the copper tones and her short tusks gleamed, and she was humming, that scale without a proper name. That old Vecari thing that worked when it shouldn't, and the module felt quieter than it was. The expedited review came back in 18 days rather than the promised 2 to 4 weeks, which the debt agent later explained was because the claim had triggered an automatic fast-track protocol for rare materials of strategic infrastructure significance, and also possibly because she had made a personal notation on the file. Davin had thanked her and meant it. The verified deposit was larger than even Vecca's recalculated estimate. The cooperative's extraction team arrived 42 days after the recall transport had left and departed, and they brought with them a settlement documentation packet that included Davin's finder's percentage, a research continuation stipend for the disruption to his primary work, and a formal contract transfer that moved Vecca's operating agreement from recall pending status to a new 10-year residency contract tied specifically to the Keltha compound's ongoing scientific advisory needs. He read the contract transfer documentation in the engineering bay at his workbench, with the same forgotten cup at his elbow and the coolant regulator sitting nearby, fixed now for months, doing its job without drama. Vecca was at the power coupling housing, the main one, which had given them both fits, running a diagnostic on the new relay she had installed last week. She was not humming. She hummed when she was at ease and went quiet when she was concentrating, and right now she was concentrating. He read the contract transfer language twice, and then set it down. "Vecca," he said. She did not look up. "The relay is almost balanced." "Vecca." She heard it this time, whatever it was in his voice that changed the quality of her name, and she pulled out of the housing and looked at him. He turned the documentation toward her. She came to the bench and read it. He watched her read it. He watched her read the phrase 10-year residency contract, and the phrase scientific advisory needs, and the phrase transfer from recall pending status, and he watched the thing her face did that was not exactly an expression in the human sense. The Vecari did not arrange their features for communication the way humans did. They were not built for it. Their faces were built for endurance and calculation, and the specific brutal environments that had produced them over a long evolutionary history. But that was something. That was some particular configuration he had not seen before and was not equipped to name. She set the documentation down. "It says 10 years, she said. "Yes. That is a long time to be on one rock." "It is," he said. "The deposit will be extracted in approximately 3 years. After that, the research value of this compound becomes," she considered, "arguable." "I know. There will be renewal negotiations." "There will." She looked at the documentation. She looked at him. She said, "Davin, why did you file for residency terms? A standard operational transfer would have cleared the debt and left the contract open-ended." "I know. Open-ended is better for renegotiation leverage." "I know that too." She waited. "I wanted to be specific," he said. "About the terms, I wanted it to say what it means." She was quiet for a long moment. Through the observation port above the bench, the amber-purple sky was beginning its mid-morning shift, the light moving from copper toward gold. Somewhere in the compound's lower section, one of the other module's teams were running a generator test, the low vibration of it just perceptible through the floor. "Okay," she said. He had thought before that the word was a kind of anchor, the shortest version of a longer statement, the word you used when the longer version would take more space than the moment could hold. He had thought she used it to close conversations, to acknowledge that a thing had been heard and accepted. He had been wrong about that, or at least incomplete. She used it the way you use a word when you have found the exact right one, and no other word will do, and you are not interested in approximation. "Okay," she said again. She went back to the power coupling housing, put her arms in, and after a moment began to hum. The scale that worked when it shouldn't, the old Vekari thing. The module felt quieter than it was. He picked up the coolant regulator. A different one, new problem, always a new problem, and got to work. In the 6th month of the residency contract, during the extraction team's operations on the Eastern Ridge, there was an incident. The extraction team, 7 members, all professional, well-equipped, operationally efficient, had been using directed vibration equipment on the subsurface crystal layer, which was standard practice, which had been approved by the cooperative's geological team, and which had nevertheless triggered a sympathetic resonance effect in a secondary rock stratum that nobody had modeled, because it required Veka's updated survey data, which the extraction team had not been provided because it had been filed separately from the initial claim documentation. A 70-meter section of the Eastern Ridge face destabilized and came down at 11:40 hours, and 3 members of the extraction team were on the wrong side of it. Davin was at the communications array when it happened. He felt the vibration in the floor before he heard anything, and he went outside and saw the dust plume rising from the eastern face, and he ran for the equipment bay without stopping to think, because there was no decision to make. Veka was already there. She had the emergency excavation equipment powered up, the compact bore cutter, and the portable atmospheric seal kit, and the emergency medical kit. And she had them loaded onto the utility crawler in the time it took him to get across the bay. She had also, he noticed, pulled up the structural analysis of the collapsed section on the crawler's display, which meant she had already spent approximately 90 seconds determining the most viable extraction route, and had identified 2 possible access corridors through the debris field, one shorter and one more stable, and had highlighted the more stable one. "Get on," she said. He got on. They drove to the Eastern Ridge. The dust was still settling. 2 of the extraction team members had made it to the safe side of the collapse and were uninjured, and one of them, a young woman named Pell, who was the team's geological specialist, and had been arguing with Veka about mineral layer interpretation for 6 months in the friendly combative way of specialists who respect each other, was sitting on the ground holding her wrist and looking at the debris field with an expression of absolute controlled terror for her 3 colleagues who were not visible. Veka stopped the crawler, looked at Pell's wrist and said, "Fracture, rapid. Can you operate the atmospheric seal kit?" Pell said yes. Veka said, "Come with us then." The 3 people on the other side of the debris field were alive. The collapse had created a void space, which happened sometimes in sympathetic resonance events, the structural failure creating a cavity instead of a crushing, and they were reachable through the more stable of the 2 corridors Veka had identified. Getting to them required moving a specific sequence of debris sections in a specific order that Davin would not have been able to calculate under pressure in the time available, and which Vecca did calculate, directing him and the two uninjured extraction team members on the placement and removal sequence, while she did the actual load-bearing work that required Veccari bone density and muscle architecture. It took 4 hours and 11 minutes. When the last person came out of the void space, a man named Chain who had a head laceration that bled impressively and a broken collarbone, and had kept himself together by talking out loud to himself in what turned out to be a dialect of Borathi that Vecca also spoke. Vecca steadied him and got him onto the crawler and looked him over with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done emergency field medicine before, and Chain looked up at her through the blood and said, "You know. I've heard about you from the compound team. They said you were good." Vecca said, "Yes." Chain almost laughed. It hurt him. He stopped. "They also said you were." He searched for the word. The word they used was wild to work with, too independent. "They said you don't follow contract protocols." Vecca looked at him steadily. "I followed all applicable protocols today," she said. Chain looked at her and then looked at Davin, who was standing behind her with rock dust in his hair and a cut on his forearm he hadn't had time to notice. And then he looked at the debris field behind them where the void space had been, and he was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "I guess you did." The extraction team filed an incident report with the Cooperative Regional Office. The report cited equipment operator error, inadequate cross-referencing of available survey data, and the specific contribution of the compound's Scientific Advisory Unit. By name, Vecca 9, Contract Designation, Residency Unit, whose structural analysis and extraction methodology had enabled the successful recovery of 3 personnel from a closed void collapse with no fatalities. The cooperative noted the incident in Vecca's operational record under the category of exceptional performance. Davin read this on his terminal and thought about what Navar had said, in what felt like another life. She's a labor unit. The cooperative designed her to do the work, and he thought about the distinction between designed to do and choosing to do, and whether that distinction was as clear as Navar had made it sound. He asked Vecca about it once, directly, because they had gotten to the point in 11 months plus the ongoing residency where he could ask things directly, and she would answer them directly, and the directness was one of the things he valued most about working with her. "Do you feel like you chose to do it?" he said. "The extraction." They were on the roof again. This had become a consistent habit, not a private one anymore. Cassie Tanny had found her way up here too, and occasionally the extraction team's geological specialist Pell came up in the evenings now that the extraction operation was in its quieter secondary phase. And once Navar had appeared at the top of the access ladder, with the specific expression of someone who has decided to stop being an adversary and would like to do that gracefully, and Davin had made room for him without comment. And Navar had sat and looked at the eastern ridge for a while and said nothing and gone back down, and the next morning sent a message that said simply assistance available, and Davin had sent back accepted. "Do I feel like I chose it?" Vecca said. She considered this with her usual deliberateness. There was no instruction to do it. The compound emergency protocol would have required me to contact the cooperative's emergency response unit, which has a 40-minute response window. The people in the void space had an estimated viable atmosphere of approximately 3 hours. The arithmetic was clear. "Arithmetic isn't a choice." "No," she said, "but I had the tools, I had the analysis, I had the knowledge of which corridor was stable." She paused. "I had you." He looked at her. "That is what made it a choice," she said. "That I had all the elements and had to decide what to do with them. That no protocol said, go now, go this way, take these people with you. I had to look at what was in front of me and decide." She looked at the ridge. "I like the deciding." He nodded. "I know," he said. The 2 moons were up again. The third was just clearing the eastern ridge, and the way the light caught the mineral face of the ridge, the same face they had pulled 3 people from, the same face that had been giving up its crystalline secrets for 3 months to the extraction team's careful machines. It threw back a kind of cold silver that lay over the amber purple of the sky, and made something particular out of both colors together that neither one was alone. Vecca was humming. Cassie Tanny was below them somewhere in the compound, probably in the commissary, probably with something warm. Pell was out on the ridge with her instruments, as she usually was. Navarre had sent a research dataset that morning that Davin was going to need to look at tomorrow, because Navarre's methodology was wrong in the 3rd-level analysis, but his raw data was good, and Davin needed good raw data. 10 years is a long time, Vecca said again. You said that before, he said. I say it again. And... She turned her head and looked at him, the amber eyes in the cold silver light, the tusks catching the moon, the particular shape of her face, which he had long since stopped seeing as alien in the way that meant unfamiliar, and had started seeing as alien in the way that meant, here is a consciousness built from a completely different set of pressures than yours, and it built something anyway, and what it built is good. And she said, 10 years is a long time. She let the silence complete itself. It is, he said. In the 2nd year of the residency contract, Davin filed an amended research proposal with his grant committee. The primary research objective had shifted, not by design but by accumulation, the natural drift of work done honestly in proximity to something worth understanding. And the amended proposal was titled, in the dry language of grant documentation, Artificial Cognition and Emergent Preference Formation in Non-Human Labor Units, a longitudinal study. He had asked Vecca if she minded. She had read the proposal carefully, all 47 pages of it, which had taken her approximately 11 minutes. She had made 6 specific notations in the margins, 4 of which were corrections to his methodology, and 2 of which were written in the compressed Veccari technical shorthand she used when she was being emphatic. He had deciphered both. The first said, "Your models are wrong in the 2nd-level analysis again." The second said, "This is accurate." He had taken that as consent. The grant committee approved the proposal with minor revisions. The cooperative, notified of the research continuation per residency contract terms, noted the amendment in their records and made no objection, because the data generated by the study would be valuable to them, and because the Keltha compound had, in its 1st year of operation under the current agreement, generated more actionable intelligence about Veccari operational cognition than the previous 15 years of standard contract performance reviews combined. And the regional office agent who had granted the administrative hold had written a small personal notation in the file that said something to the effect of, "Let this one run." Davin wrote that fact into the introduction of his first published paper from the study, because he thought it deserved to be in the record. The paper was titled On the Question of Decision as Distinct from Instruction, and it was received with the specific confusion that novel work is always received with, some reviewers finding it obvious and some finding it unsubstantiated, which in his experience meant it was probably right. Vecca read the published version and made 3 more margin notations, 2 corrections and one that said, in the Veccari technical shorthand, "This is the work." He kept that one. He put it on the wall above his workbench, where the terminal was and the forgotten cup and the various coolant regulators in various states of disassembly. And it was there when he worked and there when he walked past and there at 3:40 hours when the next bad thing arrived in his queue, as bad things would, as they did, on rocks far from anywhere that someone else had decided didn't matter. He always knew what to do about them. He had Vecca. In the 5th year, during a particularly cold cycle when the atmospheric processors needed constant attention, and the eastern ridge was producing strange interference patterns in the communications array that nobody had explained yet, Vecca said to him, one morning on the roof, with Cassie Tanny below them, and Pell out on the ridge and the amber-purple sky beginning its copper shift. Do you know what the word is in standard for what we are? He thought about it. Colleagues, he said. That's one. Partners. That's closer. He was quiet. There is a Vekari word, she said. Grevak. It means the person who stands on the same ground. She looked at the ridge. It is not a word for temporary standing. It is a word for commitment to the ground itself. To what the ground produces and requires, she paused, to the other person on it. He had learned over 5 years to let her silences be silences, to not fill them with the human habit of anxious language, to wait for what came next. I think we are Grevak, she said. He thought about the word. He thought about the recall notice at 3:40, and the crate, and her hands in the coolant regulator on day 1, and the way she hummed. He thought about the debris field and the void space and the arithmetic of 3 hours and 40 minutes. He thought about 4,012 credits and 140,000, and the deposit 60 meters below the ridge, and a cooperative agent who had flagged a file and let it run. Yeah, he said, I think we are. She looked at him. He looked at her. The copper light was doing its thing to the compound walls and her gray-green skin and her short tusks, and the eastern ridge was throwing back cold silver where the mineral face caught the late moon, and it was very quiet in the way that places are quiet when they become yours. She started humming. He picked up his cold cup and drank it. Below them, the compound went about its business. The hum of processors, the distant percussion of Pell's instruments, the smell of something Cassie Tanny was cooking that was probably experimental and probably fine. The rock beneath them was giving up its secrets in the orderly, collaborative way that rocks give up their secrets when someone is paying the right kind of attention. The sky was the color of no place either of them had been before they came here, which was, in the end, the specific quality that made it theirs. Grevak, the person who stands on the same ground. 10 years was a long time, but they had the ground. They had the ground,